because we had a chat recently on our last podcast with somebody by the name of Tyler Meredith, and he was the senior economist that advised the Liberal government, or at least specifically in this case, the federal government of Canada. He was their economic advisor in the last, I think, 6 budgets or something along those lines. And he actually helped educate us on like how the budget's even put together, right? It's actually quite super esoteric again, and probably would make some of our audience sleep, but it's actually incredibly educational because it's not what you would think, just like what you kind of articulated here as well. One of the things that he mentioned that was a little bit disappointing might not be the right word for it. I'm sure your vocabulary is much more robust, Paul, so you can let me know what the right word is. But he mentioned that not that cancer care isn't important, but it is no longer seen as the almost like top healthcare priority, right? Yeah. That other things have really taken front stage. Specifically, mental health is a very he says super top of mind. Obviously, addictions to opioids and the fentanyl pandemic, or access to primary physicians, right? That cancer care has somewhat waned because these other issues are maybe gain more speed, more light. But the other component is there's just a thought process that, hey, you know what? Actually, the mortality rate from cancer has actually improved over the last, I forgot how many decades, whatever, 3 decades, 4 decades. So, hey, you know what? Our job done, right? Like we did our job. And he actually said that if the cancer care community wants to shed light on this really important issue, because quite frankly, cancer is still the number 1 killer in Canada, and I think even a lot of the world, right? That we need to advocate. And I was thinking, like, what could we advocate for? Maybe what, as a community we need to do is really shed light around this process that's super what you say is incredibly bureaucratic, many steps, and on top of it, it's not as transparent as it could be, and hence decisions are made that aren't, like, you don't know what to make of them, right? The decision was made, and then, hey, sorry, Paul, you sent us a letter. It was super well written, but we actually can't tell you because it's confidential.
Right? Well, that was really frustrating. And so I think, as advocates, we need to be smart. We need to ask for something that is important. We need to ask for it in a respectful and reasonable way. We need to, not ask for ridiculous stuff. It has to be reasonable. But then we've got to be savvy, and we've got to say, okay, well, what are the government's priorities? Okay, so how do we phrase what we're asking for to align it with what the government wants to do? And so maybe we'll talk about equity in a bit, but equity is a big buzzword right now in federal and provincial politics. Well, we can definitely leverage that in lung cancer. But just back to what you're saying earlier about, sometimes I think we get frustrated as citizens, maybe, that some of our politicians, our political leaders, some of them are excellent. I think it's very easy to just throw politicians under the bus and say, oh, well, politicians are all just sort of ambitious people after their own, self-aggrandizement or something. But I don't think that's true. I mean, sure, there are some big egos, but generally most politicians that I've met seem to be in it for the right reasons. But there can be a tendency towards populism, and so, all the healthcare resources go to COVID or fentanyl crisis or mental health. Or family, I mentioned earlier, like a shortage of primary care, family dogs. So all of those things are important. Of course they are. I'm not denying that. And I'm not trying to say they're more important than cancer, or less important than cancer either. But sometimes we need a grown-up in the room just to say, this is not sexy. It's not the hot story, but it remains important. It remains common. It remains crucial to most families at some level in Canada. And that's, that half of us will get cancer in our lifetime. Nearly a quarter of us will die of cancer. About 80 to 85,000 people a year die of cancer. A quarter of those are lung cancer. And when we talk about progress, and I talked earlier about, my ChatGPT example of lung cancer having the biggest improvement, So 5-year survivals in lung cancer, great. They've gone from 10% 15 years ago to 22, 23%. They've more than doubled. It's been fantastic advance. But we're wrong-headed if we think that's success, because really what that means is 78% of people with lung cancer are not surviving 5 years. Whereas with prostate cancer, the 5-year survival rates are in the 90s, and breast cancer in the high 80s. So getting lost in my rambling thought here, but
that's exactly what we want.
But I think just to bring it back to kind of a conclusion, is we want to say we want our politicians who are on their 4 or 5 year cycles to watch Lagan and play the long game and say, actually, you know what? Cancer's been here for generations. It's going to be here for more generations. So let's put robust infrastructure in place. Let's figure out where the problems are. Let's combine the HTA and the negotiation pricing all together. Let's maybe push that together with Health Canada. I don't know, maybe make it just a one-stop shop. Let's think outside the box of OBA's condition, and let's not just kind of go from, what the story of the week is and how